We're at August of 1978, and you are sworn in as the United States District Judge for the Middle District of Tennessee. How do you learn to do what a judge is supposed to do in the federal system?
Just work at it, I guess. I did not have a lot of experience with federal criminal cases, and that's something I had to work at. But you know, I'd been trying civil cases all of my professional life, and that was no problem at all.
We're going to talk in a few minutes about some of the many decisions you've had to make as a judge. But I want to ask you right now about the role that your law clerks have played in your career, and tell me about them, and tell me about that.
Well, what it amounts to is I've got about 50 surrogate children. Seriously. I have a wonderful relationship with my law clerks. You see more of them than you do your family, you know. And I've been blessed with having some really smart young people and good writers, good thinkers, well trained and well educated. It's been a challenge for me to keep up with them, and it's just been a lot of fun.
How did you go about choosing your law clerks? What is that process like?
Well, early in the game, I used to get a lot of applications. I mean, like a couple of hundred, you know, that I would go through and cut down to a series of interviews with the ones that I thought were most attractive, most qualified, and then just then make a choice.
Were you partial to Vanderbilt Law School graduates? Was that something that was a plus if somebody had the Vanderbilt connection?
It was a plus only to the extent that I really wanted to contribute to the quality of the bar in Middle Tennessee. And I figured that people who went to Vanderbilt were more likely to locate around here.
So your bias was to have people as law clerks that you thought were likely to stay in this neck of the woods.
And likely to be trial lawyers. I do have a bias because, and I always tell the law clerk applicants, you know, if you're going to do appellate law, if you're going to do transactional law, it's more or if you're going to teach, it's more prestigious to go do a circuit clerkship. But if you're going to be a trial lawyer, you'll learn more about the practice of law in the district court, in the trial court. So I just ask them what kind of law and most of them really don't know. You know?
Right. The ones who think they know might not be the ones you want to hire anyway.
Well, anyhow, but you know, I give them that little speech that I just gave you there.
In terms of the day-to-day work of being a federal judge, what do you find is the most consistently challenging part of that job? Is it sentencing people?
That's tough.
Tell me about that.
Well, you know, we've the sentencing process in the federal court has gone from here to Normandy and back.
It's been a swinging pendulum, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. As you also know that I testified before both houses of Congress on against the adoption of the federal sentencing guidelines on behalf of the Federal Judges Association. Didn't do any good, but it's run the gamut now of from being hard hard lines, guidelines, not only guidelines, just you could almost sentence by a computer to what the guidelines really ought to be, which are advisory. And that's good. That relieves some of the discretionary pressure that you feel when trying to decide how much. Particularly in a conspiracy case, I used to worry about who was the most egregious and who was the biggest leader, you know. But yes, sentencing is difficult.
You mentioned the Federal Judges Association. Did you play a role in the development of that organization? Tell us what that is and what it did for federal
Well, it's
judges.
our union.
Federal judges have
That's
a
what we
union.
call it.
Yeah.
We call it our union. It started in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Spencer Williams from California had established a Ninth Circuit Judges Association, and I was president of the Judges Association in the Sixth Circuit. And Spencer came up there. We were all at the University of Michigan Law School at a seminar, and he came up there, and we had a joint meeting between the Sixth and the Ninth, and we put the Federal Judges Association together, and then it went on from there.
And what did that organization do? What did it promote? What was its mission?
Better pay, for one thing. That's what we were very interested in, you know.
Because the pay when you started out was how much?
Oh, my
78?
recollection is about $50,000.
Oh, 50. Okay.
Yeah.
In 1978.
Yeah. But because I remember that I think I took home in the tax year 1977, I took home 100 and as a practicing lawyer, and of course
Another pay cut.
another 50% pay cut.
Yeah. Well, your career has been marked by taking pay cuts to achieve different positions. That is one notable consistency.
But this, you know, it's been worth it.
You've never chosen to do things because of how much money you're going to make.
No. But fortunately, Emily and I have been blessed with both. We don't need a lot of money, and we have enjoyed a lot of things that we've enjoyed.
Living in the same house.
Travel.
Living in the same house you moved into in 1971.
Right.
Now, you also served on the Judicial Conference of the United States Courts. Tell us what that is. And
I was on it for 5 years. Every circuit elects a district judge to sit on the Judicial Conference of the United States.
And that's the organized governing body for the.
It's the governing body of the judiciary. The chief judge of the circuit is by law a member, and then one district judge is elected. So you got 12 district judges and 12 circuit judges, chief circuit judges, and the Chief Justice of the United States.
And where
that's 25 people. That's
a small number.
That's it. Yeah.
And the meetings would occur in the Supreme Court building.
Right.
Now, where were you on September 11, 2001?
I was in the Supreme Court building.
And what happened? You were in a meeting.
Judge Rehnquist was starting the meeting at 9 o'clock, and a lady came in, whispered something in his ear, and he says, "We're going to have to abandon this meeting. Everybody has to get out of the building."
Did you enjoy that being on the Judicial Conference?
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah.
You have very many interests. One thing you did was get an LLM at the University of Virginia.
Yes.
So tell us about that. Why did you do that, and what was that all about?
Well, it's a program that they started at UVA where they only accept appellate judges from state courts, and maybe they take some trial judges too, but mostly appellate judges from the state courts, and appellate and district judges from the federal courts. And they have about 30 judges, I think, in each class that they will, and it lasts for 2 years. You take 6 weeks of classes each summer for 2 years, and then you write a thesis.
And what was your thesis on?
On the revisions to, or the proposed revisions to the federal judiciary that came out at that time. This was in my classes were 88 and 89, and the graduation was in 90, and my thesis was 1990. But there was a commission during that period of time that was making substantial revisions or recommendations about the Supreme Court. And
why did you want to do that?
it sounded fun.
And you like to learn.
Yeah.
Something else that you've done is travel internationally and have assisted in other nations' judiciaries. And I believe one was, is it Bosnia where you went?
I spent 3 months in Bosnia.
Tell us about that.
Are you familiar with CELI, the Central and Eastern European Legal Initiative, or something close to that? That's CELI. It's something that is done by the American Bar Association and in conjunction with the AID, Agency for International Development of the State Department.
And you lived in where, and what did you do?
Birch Cove. Birch Cove is a town in the northeast corner of Bosnia, and it was when they had the Cleveland Accords, they were unable to find out what to do with Bosnia.
Cleveland or Dayton Accords?
Dayton. I'm sorry. They couldn't agree on what to do with Birch Cove, so they set it up sort of as a showcase for the rest of Bosnia.
Multi-ethnic. Let's see if we can make this work.
Yeah,
place.
Right. And so I went over there as a consultant to their judiciary, and I'd go in and sit with them. I had an interpreter stayed with me all the time, but I'd listen to their cases, and then we'd talk about it after it was over, and and I wound up making some recommendations, which I don't think they'll ever adopt, but their system is the biggest problem that they've got is that they cannot get rid of cases. They can't dispose of cases. Their lawyers are paid by the appearance. Every time they come to court, they get the equivalent of about $50.
That's a negative incentive for ending the case.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, how did you get to know the Chief Justice of the Russian Supreme Court?
I went with another judge from here, from Las Vegas. He and I went over there representing the Judicial Conference of the United States to attend the equivalent, the Russian equivalent, and we both made a couple of speeches and attended their meetings and had a good time. And I've done similar things in Normandy with the Cour d'Appel of the Lower Normandy as part of Sister Cities program.
Life tenure, is that a good thing?
Absolutely.
Why?
Well, I've had to make some decisions, Tom, that would be very difficult to get reelected if, after I'd made these decisions. School desegregation, higher education desegregation, making Austin Peay allow the gay students to have a booth at the at employee fair. Those are just a few examples, of things that you have to do, you have to decide, and that if you have to stand for re-election, it's bound to affect your ability to decide a case.
Well,
a difficult case.
You mentioned the desegregation cases you've had, and I want to talk to you some about the Metro Nashville desegregation case. You inherited that case.
I did.
And you issued an opinion after having a lengthy evidentiary hearing concerning the state of the metropolitan school system and whether it met the laws concerning desegregation. Is that right?
Yes.
Who was
6 weeks.
6-week evidentiary hearing. Now, who represented the school board in that case?
Bill Willis and Marion Harrison.
And of course, Mr. Willis, one of the finest trial lawyers in Tennessee, just passed away recently. He was a good friend of yours, wasn't he?
Classmate and dear friend, yes.
And Marion Harrison is a bankruptcy judge.
Bankruptcy judge.
And the lawyers for the plaintiff in the case, I don't recall the name of the plaintiff.
Richard Dinkins and Avon Williams, and George Barrett is an intervenor.
Yes. And 6 weeks, including those 6 weeks of evidentiary hearings, did you actually ride school buses and try to understand what children had to go through in terms of the travel? Tell us what you did.
Well, I rode the routes, the school bus routes.
Why did you do that?
Well, I wanted to see what I was doing to people, or what was being proposed to be done to people.
The thought just now occurs to me, though of course I remember you doing that. Were the lawyers aware that you were doing that?
I may have told them about it, but I had a marshal drive me. I had a map and a layout, and a marshal drove me in a government vehicle. It was not. I didn't think it was anything that required the presence of the lawyers.
So that was a fact-finding mission, though, that you did really on your own initiative.
I guess it is.
I'm not criticizing it. I think it's interesting that you did that.
That's something that Eddie Morgan wrote. You mentioned him a while ago. He wrote
the evidence professor.
Yeah, the evidence professor wrote about judicial notice. Legislative judicial notice.
It would take a long time for you to explain in detail, but you weren't on school buses. You rode in the car with the marshals.
Right.
Sorry, I misspoke on that. It would take a long time for you to summarize in detail, but you did try to do some innovative things in that desegregation opinion. Just briefly describe some of the ideas that you had in order to address what you felt needed to be addressed.
Well, we'd had expert testimony on behalf of the plaintiffs. The thrust of which was to say that it's demeaning to say that a black child can only get a good education sitting next to a white child.
You didn't accept the symbiosis theory.
No, I didn't. To some extent, yes. We came up with a requirement of 15% of other race.
That's what your opinion said.
Yeah, and we did some other things to try to eliminate the effect of white flight. We required sensitivity training of teachers going into ghetto schools, and a whole lot of things that some were small details, but some of them pretty substantial changes from from what the norm was in these decisions, and we called it the Wiseman plan, but it was generated by a cooperative school board and the experts on behalf of the plaintiff.
The evidentiary hearing was not a contentious affair in terms of what was going on between the school board and the plaintiff, was it?
It was not.
My sense of it was, and tell me if this is correct, that everybody was well-intentioned to try to find a way to solve this problem.
It was, and I felt that it was necessary to bring the public along in knowledge of what was going on. So I had a wonderful, wonderful woman, reporter from the Tennessean, who had a PhD and she was an educator.
And she attended every day of the hearing?
Oh, she attended every hearing, and she'd come in and talk to me after it was over, you know, if there was anything that she didn't understand. And I publicly invited the public to write letters and react.
Now, is that when you...
And I read them all, too.
Is that when you talked about the riffraff in Fairview at some point?
No. I didn't say, I didn't use riffraff.
There was some kind of
No, I'll tell you what, that's another case. That's another case where Fairview fired a principal, and I made him hire him back, and then he screwed up again. But
so when the reporter was coming in to talk with you, that was on background and not you weren't quoted. There was no attribution to that.
No attribution. I was just giving her background.
But your motivation was to educate the public.
To educate the public.
How did you...
Or educate them as what was going on, keep them aware of what was going on. It wasn't a matter of education, just was keeping them aware of what was happening.
Tell me about your experience growing up in southeastern rural Tennessee in the days of Jim Crow, going back after law school and living and working there and representing all different segments of the community, and how those years helped shape your views that led you to issue that decision in 1982.
Well, I was very proud of Tullahoma, for one thing, in that the transition from a segregated school system in Tullahoma to an integrated system was smooth as silk. You know, just no problems whatsoever. But other than that, Tom, I grew up aware of Jim Crow and resentful of Jim Crow, but not resentful, but ashamed of Jim Crow is the best way I could say it. I went to a Methodist church camp when I was a child and came home. My dad was on the city council at that time, and I asked him, I said, Dad, why don't we have any black police officers? You know, that's one thing they just sort of exposed me to at this Methodist church camp. And of course, he gave the traditional answer at that time: we need to, we ought to, but we're not ready. When are you going to get ready? You know. But that was sort of a standard feeling of people at that time about integration.
Now, that opinion that you wrote was appealed.
Yeah.
And the plaintiff appealed it.
Yeah.
And the Sixth Circuit, what did the Sixth Circuit do?
2-1 decision, reversing and reversing in part and affirming in part. The reversal was on my relaxing a requirement that the racial makeup of each school conform to the racial makeup of the whole student body of the city. In other words, if 65-35, you had to have 65 whites and 35% blacks in every school.
And you wanted to relax that
Yep.
to keep neighborhood schools alive.
To the extent possible, yeah. But still require a presence of other race in order to give the children the experience of an integrated society that they're soon going to have to.
That was a big disappointment, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
You'd put a lot of time and effort in that.
I did.
And felt like you'd really come up with
I
the,
did.
the right solution.
Yeah.
Years later,
No. Oh yeah.
you had a
Okay,
conversation
Right. Go ahead.
with Avon Williams' son. And tell us about that and what you learned.
Well, Avon had developed Lou Gehrig's disease, and he could only speak with a few people, his son being one. But I was with young Avon, who's now deceased himself, by the way.
Yes.
I said, you know what? It really disappointed me that your father appealed that case. I said, I thought we had worked together with the counsel for both sides, and I pretty much went along with most of the recommendations of his expert. And so I was surprised, and especially waiting as long as he did to do it, so that we had to change everything around at the last minute. And he said, I'm going to ask you about that, and I'll get back to you. And he did. And the answer was that it was just so dramatically different from what their stance had been earlier, that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund had insisted that he appeal it.
It seems interesting to me, and there's an irony to that. Your father said that Tullahoma wasn't ready to have a black police officer, and Avon Williams said that the instructions came down from the NAACP and said, we're not ready to have any kind of discretion in what the racial mix is going to be.
That is ironic, and it's further ironic in that the recently adopted plan of the Metro School Board is almost my plan.
Exactly. Which just means that sometimes change has to occur incrementally, I guess,
Yeah,
is a
I guess.
lesson to be learned.
Yep. Well, that case I had for 28 years.
And what about the
And
Geyer case? How about the Geyer case?
Then I also had the Geyer case, which was higher education in Tennessee, and with particular emphasis on TSU. And
that case was just fairly recently.
I had it. You see, I inherited it from Judge Gray also, and I had it for 28, 30 years. I don't know.
The Nashville desegregation case caused a lot of controversy in the community.
Diminished over time.
Yes, but you mentioned that you had to make a change because of the appeal situation. What was the timing of that caused this significant disruption?
Right at the very end of the summer, and just before school was going to start.
After plans have been made.
Yeah, and you know, schools closed and some opened, and it was just to go back to where we had been was a hassle, but we got it accomplished.
You did actually had to make the hard choice of deciding to close some schools or merge them. Pearl Cone, for example. Is that an outgrowth of that of your decision making?
Well, that was part of it. You know, for instance, we did the problem areas were Antioch and Bellevue. You know, they're so far out that to get them integrated was very, very difficult. They're so far from the central city where most of the blacks live.
People may be interested to know from your perspective, and you're senior status now, so you're not carrying the same caseload that you used to. But if you look back in those not too long ago years when you were carrying a full caseload, what is an average day for a federal judge like? Tell us what you do.
Well, you do
what you have
what you have to do.
Every day is pretty much different, I would imagine.
Well, you deal with the cases, and the cases are different because people are different. But yeah, there's a lot of paperwork involved, and of course, you read a lot, and you talk to your law clerks about about cases that they're working on, and I don't know. It's hard to answer that question, Tom. It's
There's probably not a typical day, is there?
no, really. In the early part of my service, when there were only 2 of us here, I had a caseload of some 600 cases. And now the average caseload of an active district judge is about 250.
Now, your judicial career has been from 1978 to the present, and
Yeah.
the good Lord willing, more years to come. You've seen a lot of changes. One thing I want to ask you about, since you have so many granddaughters now, is how is the changes you've observed with the role of women in the legal profession?
I'm going to tell you a story that I think illustrates the answer to your question. Juliet Griffin, who's now magistrate judge, was my first law clerk, and a wonderful one. But while she was there, we had this woman from Chicago, I'll never forget. And she came into court representing this mule, a young woman who was just carrying dope back and forth.
That's what a mule is.
That's what a mule
Drug
is, yeah.
business.
But she was a nice-looking young woman, but she rode the plane from Chicago to Nashville back and forth. And this woman had on a pantsuit, silk, with a plunging neckline. And she was tough as nails. Boy, she did a good job. And not long after that, one of the women who practiced in the court asked me about how a woman should dress. You know, and I told her about this woman coming in and winning that lawsuit and to a jury. You know, she got a jury verdict. And I said, I don't think you ought to be worried about that. You don't have to wear a suit with pinstripes every time you walk into court. Just be natural. Well, respectful, but natural. You know. Yeah.
And have you seen more and more women appear
Oh,
before
yeah,
you? And
yeah. The women's bar of the state gave me an award for being a mentor of the year or something like that. I don't know what it was, but anyhow,
you're proud of that.
I'm proud of that.
You should
yeah.
be. Well, in talking about lawyers, I'd like for you to talk about some of the lawyers that have influenced you, whether it's as an attorney or as a judge. And one person that comes to mind is John Hooker Sr.
Oh, one of the finest lawyers I ever knew.
Tell us about John Hooker Sr.
Well, he was a commanding presence for one thing. Had a deep voice with just resonant. He was bright as he could be. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and he had a lot of common sense. And he was just a pleasant fellow to know. And he was a person that I really admired and respected and enjoyed being able to be his friend. Pete Haynes, who was my law partner, had a wonderful ability to sense what was important in a lawsuit, to be able to see through it to what was going to impress a jury, how a person with common sense is going to react to this your theory or the plaintiff's theory or whatever, but abilities to predict juries. You've got that.
Do lawyers make a difference in the outcome of cases?
Oh, yeah.
What are the qualities that make an effective trial lawyer?
Well, honesty and maintaining your reputation as an honest practitioner, and especially with the courts. If you lose your respect, the respect of the judges, you're in trouble.
Above all, be honest.
That's right.
And
That's
candid.
right. And candid, yeah. And don't try to be slick or play games, you know.
And that's true whether it's with the judge or the jury.
I'm with you fellow lawyers. You know?
Have you noticed a change in the way lawyers treat each other from the old days?
Yeah, I have. I think I told you earlier that I had a lot of cases with Jim Henry, and he could. Haynes would say he could strut sitting down, but he had big ego. But and he and I fought tooth and nail, but we were friends. And you could still have a drink with a fellow after the case was over.
Have you sensed that's changed?
I hope it has, but I hear that it may have, you know.
That leads me to ask you about being a federal judge. Have you felt somewhat isolated and had a change in relationships that you used to have with dear friends who were lawyers?
Right.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, you know, lawyers are a pretty incestuous bunch. You know, we read each other, and we are friends with each other, and we prefer to talk to each other, I guess. But lawyers impose on themselves a distance from the judiciary. They don't want to be accused of currying favor, and I understand that, but it has an isolating effect.
And sometimes have you at least lamented that over
Yes,
the years?
Yes. Yes.
Have juries changed? The makeup of juries. Who comes in and serves as juries?
Well, in the federal system, we are very different from what it used to be when I was practicing law in southern counties, southern Middle Tennessee counties. You know, there were sons of rest out on every courthouse lawn, whittling on a cedar stick, and if you ran out of juries, you'd go out there and get some more. Mr. Sheriff, go out there and get us some juries. And then a lot of busy, intelligent people who would make good jurors got off, would get excused. So I think we have a much more representative jury now of the populace, and it really is, I think, pretty much a jury of your peers.
Has your time on the bench reinforced your faith in the jury system? Or
Yes.
Tell us why that is.
Well, 32 years I've been doing this job. I don't know how many jury cases I've tried, but I think I have set aside jury verdicts maybe 3 times in that amount of time, where I felt like the jury just went wrong and ordered a new trial. You know, you don't have the same 13th juror principle in the federal district court that you do in the state court. You got to make a finding that it's that the jury verdict was the result of passion, prejudice, or unaccountable caprice, and some other hoops you got to jump over, but you know.
But when you have evaluated the results of jury verdicts over the years, you've only found it necessary to set aside approximately 3 in all these years.
Yeah. And I really do believe that juries reach the right result, sometimes for the wrong reason, but they get the right result. I think they.
Do you allow lawyers to participate extensively in the voir dire process?
Oh, absolutely.
That's
another thing I did I testified in favor of a change in the law to require judges to allow lawyer voir dire. I think that's part of being a good lawyer.
You wanted to make that mandatory.
Yes, sir. In the federal system.
But the trend or the bias in the federal system is completely against that.
Absolutely.
And you disagree with that bias?
I do.
Why?
I do. Because, like I say, I think I think that's part of good lawyering. It's where you plant the seed of your theory. It's where you it's the only chance you have to talk directly to the jury and get a really good. And you know the case a lot better than the judge does, who sits up there maybe and asks some pro forma questions. But you understand the nuances. You understand what a juror is going to have to do to accept your theory.
This is kind of preaching to the choir, but a lawyer can actually help select a fairer jury than just a judge on the bench. Do you agree
think
with
so
that?
too. I agree.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you have a tendency to hire law clerks that you hope will practice in Middle Tennessee
Or Tennessee.
Or Tennessee.
Yeah.
To help populate the state with
good lawyers.
Good lawyers. You've also taught at the National Institute for Trial Advocacy.
Yes, I have.
Tell us about that.
Well, that same lawyer, remember I told you about with Juliet Griffin, while we were waiting for the jury to come back,
The Chicago lawyer?
Yeah, she came back and talked to me and told Juliet, said, you ought to go to the NITA courses. And I said, what is NITA? You know, and she proceeded to tell me that fairly recently at that time, this was about 1979, she said the American Bar Association, along with the American College of Trial Lawyers and perhaps others, had put together a way to address the problem of law schools not giving you the necessary practical training. And NITA has now become, and was fast at that time becoming, standard with all of the law schools. They were patterning their trial advocacy classes after it, but the NITA itself was excellent training. Now, I taught for trial ed for 15 years at Vanderbilt, and I taught NITA for after that. That woman, after she told me what it was, I said, I'd like to participate in that. She said, I'll see that you get to. And so she enrolled me in the national faculty.
And you went to Boulder, Colorado, I believe, on many occasions to teach out there.
In the summer, and also they had an advanced course at the University of Florida Law School.
Now, one of the positions that you actually spoke publicly about some years ago, it had to do with your feeling about the drugs and whether certain drugs should be, illegal drugs should be legalized. Tell us about that.
Well, I don't think you're ever going to make any progress dealing with the drug problem until you take the profit out of it. I think as long as you can buy a kilogram of cocaine for $20,000 and cook it down into crack and sell it for 100, 150, somebody's going to do it. And so I don't know the answer. I don't know all the ways of how, but I know we need to change. Because what we have done is decimate an entire generation of young black men. Half of the black men between 18 and 30 are either in jail or under supervision. And most of that is because of the drug sales. They see who gets a kid growing up in the ghetto, sees who gets the women, who wears the gold chains, who drives the Mercedes, and it's the drug dealer.
So that's who they look up to.
And that's who they look up to. And as long as that's the case, you're not going to be able to do anything about it.
So you're.
I've had brother. I'll send a young man off to the penitentiary for dealing drugs, and have his younger brother come up a year later. It's really distressing and pitiful.
And you want something to change.
I want something to change. I want us to rethink the problem,
the system,
and rethink the system, and rethink the solutions to the system. And yes, I have tried to draw attention to the problem for as long as I've been on the bench.
Another thing that's been of interest to you is the separation of church and state.
Yeah.
Tell us about that interest and the things you've done to help educate people about that.
Again, I've made some speeches about it. I've written some articles about it. And
tell us about your philosophy about the separation of church and state.
Well, I just think that a church should not need and should not receive, if it did need, the aid of government to promote its dogma. I think that's it's just violative of the First Amendment.
You've just devoted considerable time to studying that.
Yes, I have.
Have published articles and given speeches.
Yes.
If there was, you've mentioned the role of drugs and how the system has decimated a generation of African Americans in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something you've told us that you'd like to change. What else in your years of experience on the bench have you seen that you would like to change, that you would like to see people know more about, and for the system to address and try to change things? You had the brother, young man you had to send away, and the lesson of him going to prison did not influence the younger brother to not follow that same path. Is there anything else about the jury system or about the way we resolve and decide disputes that you'd like to change, or do you still hold on to this is the best way to resolve disputes that we have?
No. Of course, we have the Sentencing Commission, which is a step perhaps in the right direction. They devote some time to studying the statistics and so forth in this area. But I think that we have gone too far away from a perceived ineptitude of the rehabilitation model in sentencing. And we've gone to a pure
punitive
punishment model. And what we need to do is rethink that and try to figure out some way that for a long time, we were building 1,000 new beds a week in the penitentiary systems of this country, and still everybody was overcrowded. We've got more people incarcerated in this country per 100,000 people than any other country in the world.
And then once they're there, we're not doing anything to help them learn skills.
Or not only that, we're just teaching them how to be better criminals.
Mm-hmm.
and we've got to go. We've got to rethink that. You know, but for a long time, it has been the popular thing to do in Congress to be out there, more punishment for more crimes and send more of them off and longer terms, and it just hadn't worked. Hadn't worked.
Now, let's look at the civil justice system for a minute now. In your experience, have you noticed that fewer and fewer cases are going to trial?
Oh, I certainly have.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, as an old trial lawyer, I think it's a bad thing, you know.
Well, I share that feeling.
Yeah, I think it's a bad thing. The alternative dispute resolution mechanisms that are out there now are cheaper, I guess. Although I know some arbitrators that are charging $1,000 an hour, but it's it's a matter of tradition, and I just like the old method of dispute resolution. And that's what's happening in a lot of instances. 95% of my civil docket settles.
Well, I want to ask you my next to last question.
Okay.
Is there anything that I have failed to ask you that you'd like to discuss?
You failed to ask me about some things that I'm glad you didn't ask me.
Well, I said it's the next to last question, but my friend Barry Bernstein has suggested I ask you some more, and I think she's right. We focused almost exclusively on your legal, political, and judicial career. But there are other passions that you have in your life. You like to read. What are some hobbies? What are things that over the years that you have enjoyed that have been diversions for you?
I love to duck hunt. I love to travel. I've enjoyed some gardening, and I love to cook. I'm a chef.
Now, you've also been known to enjoy collecting and wine and
Yes.
learning about wine.
Absolutely. Well, yes. That goes along with the love of food and wine. Yes.
As I have had this wonderful opportunity to reflect back on your life and your career, I wonder, how did you do all this? I mean, what's your secret for having so many interests and having such a varied career? It's enough for many more than one person.
Being lucky and blessed. That's the way I've had about to turn 80, and I've had a good ride.
Well, it's not over yet. And I want to tell you that this has been important to me. Thank you.